The morning of the wedding should have been the happiest day of my life. The air buzzed with excitement as friends and family flitted around the venue, their laughter and congratulations blending into a symphony of celebration. I stood in my suite, staring at the reflection of a man who was ready to start a new chapter, who believed he was marrying the love of his life. But what I didn't know was that this day wouldn't mark the beginning of my happily ever after. It would become a nightmare I'd never forget. I hadn't meant to overhear her. I was on my way to check in with the florist about some last-minute adjustments when I passed the bridal suite. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard Emma, my fiancée, laughing with her maid of honor, Ashley. I stopped, smiling at the sound of her joy. But as I turned to walk away, Emma's words froze me in my tracks. "I can't believe it happened," she whispered, her tone both giddy and nervous. Ashley's voice dropped, barely audible. "Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything?" "No way," Emma replied. "Last night was incredible, but it was a one-time thing. No one has to know, not even Jake." Jake? That was me. My heart thundered in my chest as realization dawned. "Ileana Kluze, bareli bratin, prayinide mishet." "Seriously, though," Ashley said, her voice tight. "Sleeping with the best man the night before your wedding? That's next-level insanity." Emma's laugh was soft, almost smug. "He'll never find out. Tom knows how to keep a secret. And by tomorrow, none of this will matter." I staggered back, my vision blurring with rage and disbelief. My best friend Tom, my best man, the two people I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. I stumbled down the hallway, my heart pounding as though it was trying to escape my chest. The world felt like it had shifted on its axis. Moments ago, I had been a man excited to marry the love of his life. Now, I was someone else entirely, someone betrayed, humiliated, and burning with a fury I didn't recognize. I ducked into an empty room, needing to get away from the laughter and chatter of the guests. My hands shook as I clutched the edge of a table, replaying Emma's words in my head. Last night was incredible. The image of her and Tom together, their whispers, their laughs, made my stomach churn. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to march back to that bridal suite and confront her right then and there. But I stopped myself. No, not yet. If I rushed in now, I'd lose control. I needed to think. I slumped into a chair, my mind racing. Every memory I had of Emma and Tom replayed like a cruel montage. The way she had hugged him a little too tightly when we asked him to be the best man. The way they exchanged inside jokes at our engagement party. The late-night planning sessions where they claimed to be helping me out. How had I not seen it? My thoughts turned to the guests gathering outside. The hundreds of friends and family who had traveled here to celebrate us. My parents, who adored Emma and saw her as the daughter they never had. Her parents, who had spent months gushing about how lucky I was to be marrying their perfect daughter. Would they still see her as perfect if they knew the truth? And then there was Tom, my best friend since high school. The guy who had been there for every milestone of my life. College graduations, breakups, promotions. The guy who had toasted to my happiness at the rehearsal dinner last night, all while hiding the knife he'd buried in my back. The betrayal stung almost as much as Emma's. A knock on the door snapped me out of my spiral. "Jake, you in here?" It was Tom's voice, laced with his usual cheerfulness. My jaw clenched. My pulse roared in my ears. "I'm here," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. The door opened, and there he was, all smiles in his tailored tuxedo. "Man, you're cutting it close. Ceremony starts in an hour." "You good?" I stared at him, my hands curling into fists at my sides. How could he stand there, so casual, so confident, after what he'd done? "Yeah," I said, tightly standing. "I'm good." "Cool," he said, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Let's get you ready. Big moment, huh?" I followed him out of the room, my heart pounding. This wasn't the time to confront him, or Emma. Not yet. I had an idea, and it was going to require patience. As I followed Tom back to the groom's suite, every step felt like a battle. My anger simmered just below the surface, begging for release. But I couldn't afford to lose my temper. Not yet. Tom rambled on about the weather, the venue, and the guests, his voice a constant drone in the background. I barely heard him, too consumed by my own thoughts. I needed a plan, A way to expose them both for the liars they were. Something public, something undeniable. The idea hit me like a lightning bolt. The vows. I'd been agonizing over writing my vows for weeks, wanting them to be perfect. Now, I saw them for what they could be, a weapon. I'd stand before Emma, our friends, and our families, and I'd tell the truth. I'd expose her betrayal in front of everyone, tearing down the perfect image she'd so carefully crafted. Back in the groom's suite, Tom handed me a drink. Here, man, calm the nerves. You're about to make an honest woman out of Emma. I stared at the glass in his hand, wondering if he felt even a sliver of guilt. But his face betrayed nothing, just that easy grin I'd known for years. Thanks, I said, taking the drink but not sipping it. As he turned away to adjust his tie in the mirror, I studied him. He'd been my best friend for more than a decade, but now he felt like a stranger. Someone who could smile in my face while betraying me behind my back. I clenched the glass in my hand, my knuckles white. You nervous? I asked, testing him. Tom chuckled. Me? Nah, I'm just happy for you, man. Emma's amazing. You're a lucky guy. His words dripped with irony, but his tone was so casual it made me question everything. Did he even regret what he'd done? Or was he so confident I'd never find out that he felt no shame? The next hour passed in a blur. The photographer came by for a few quick shots. My mom poked her head into fuss over my boutonniere. All the while, I went through the motions, keeping up appearances, smiling when expected. But inside, I was unraveling. Finally, it was time. Ready? Tom asked, clapping me on the shoulder as we stood at the edge of the garden where the ceremony would take place. I nodded, the weight of my plans settling heavily on my chest. The music began to play, and Tom and I walked to the altar. The guests stood, their faces full of joy and anticipation. I scanned the crowd, my eyes landing on Emma's parents in the front row, her father dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was this the right thing to do? Would I be ruining more than just Emma's day if I went through with it? But then I saw Emma. She stepped into view, radiant in her white gown, her arm linked with her father's as they walked down the aisle. She looked every bit the blushing bride, her smile wide and confident. And all I could think about was the whisper I'd overheard, her smug laugh as she talked about her betrayal. My resolve hardened. This wasn't just about me. This was about the truth. As Emma walked down the aisle, the world seemed to slow. The music swelled, the guests beamed, and her dress glimmered in the sunlight. She looked stunning, every inch the perfect bride. But to me, her beauty felt like a cruel facade, masking the betrayal that had unraveled my world. Tom stood beside me, his hands clasped in front of him, smiling like he didn't have a care in the world. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. How could he stand there, so close to me, after what he'd done? When Emma reached the altar, her father handed her off with a warm smile. Take care of her, he said softly, clapping me on the shoulder. I'll do my best, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Emma stepped beside me, her eyes bright and full of joy. Or maybe it was just the thrill of getting away with her betrayal. Hi, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Hi, I said, forcing a small smile. The officiant began to speak, welcoming the guests and talking about the sanctity of marriage. His words felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Sanctity, commitment, trust. They were just words now, hollow and meaningless. Emma squeezed my hand as the officiant asked us to recite our vows. Her gaze locked with mine, and for a brief moment I hesitated. Was this the right thing to do? Could I really expose her like this, in front of everyone we knew? Then I remembered her voice in the bridal suite, the smug laugh, the way she dismissed what she'd done like it didn't matter. The hesitation evaporated. This wasn't about revenge. It was about the truth. Jake, the officiant said, nodding toward me, you may recite your vows. I took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The guests leaned forward slightly, their faces eager and expectant. Emma smiled at me, her hand warm in mine. And then I began. I always thought this day would be the happiest of my life, I said, my voice calm and steady. Standing here in front of our family and friends, marrying the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. Emma's smile widened, her cheeks flushing with emotion. But sometimes life doesn't go the way you expect, I continued. Sometimes, the person you trust the most turns out to be someone you never really knew at all. Emma's smile faltered, her brow furrowing slightly. I wrote these vows to celebrate the love we were supposed to share, I said. But instead, I think it's only fair to use this moment to share something else, the truth. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Emma's hand tightened on mine, her expression shifting to one of confusion and panic. Last night, I said, my voice rising. The night before our wedding, the woman I was going to marry decided to spend her time with someone else. Not with me, but with my best man. Gasps erupted from the guests. Emma's face turned ghostly white, her eyes wide with horror. "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth, Emma," I said, my gaze locking with hers. "The truth you thought you could hide." Tom, standing beside me, looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "You think you know someone," I continued, turning to address the crowd, "but sometimes they show you exactly who they are at the worst possible moment." Emma's father shot to his feet, his face a mix of shock and anger. Her mother clutched her pearls, her mouth agape. "I thought I was marrying the love of my life," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "But instead, I was about to marry a liar and a cheat." Emma let go of my hand, her entire body shaking. "Jake, stop. Please, this isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," I interrupted. "The people here deserve to know the truth, just like I did." The officiant, clearly flustered, stammered something about decorum, but I ignored him. My heart pounded as I stepped back, putting space between myself and Emma. "This wedding is over," I said firmly, turning to the stunned crowd. "Thank you all for coming, but there's nothing left to celebrate." I walked down the aisle, my legs trembling but my resolve steady. Behind me, chaos erupted, shouts, gasps, and the sound of Emma's sobs. But I didn't look back. I walked out of the garden and into the empty hallway of the venue, my head spinning. The adrenaline that had carried me through my vows was fading, replaced by a cold, gnawing ache in my chest. The crowd's reaction, gasps, murmurs, Emma's sobs, rang in my ears. I could still see her face, pale and horrified, as the truth unraveled around her. For a brief moment, I wondered if I'd gone too far. But no. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. I didn't make it far before someone caught up to me. "Jake!" It was Tom. Of course it was. I turned to face him, my hands balled into fists. He was flushed, his usually smug expression replaced with one of panic. "Look, man, I don't know what you think you heard." I stepped toward him, my voice low and cold. "Don't you dare lie to me right now." "I know, Tom. I heard her. I saw the way you stood there, smiling in my face like you didn't betray me." Tom raised his hands defensively. "It wasn't like that." "What wasn't like that?" I snapped. "The part where you slept with my fiancé the night before our wedding? Or the part where you pretended to be my best friend?" He stammered, his face pale. It was a mistake, okay? We were drunk, and it just happened. That's the best you can come up with?" I said, my voice rising. "It just happened? You think that makes it better?" Tom flinched, his hands dropping to his sides. "I'm sorry, Jake. I don't know what else to say." I stared at him, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me. "You're not sorry," I said quietly. "You're just sorry you got caught." Before Tom could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. Emma appeared, her makeup streaked with tears, her wedding dress dragging behind her. "Jake, wait!" she cried, her voice breaking. I turned to her, my chest tightening. "What do you want, Emma?" Her eyes pleaded with me, tears streaming down her face. "Please, let's talk. Just the two of us. You can't end it like this." I laughed bitterly. "You ended it, Emma. The moment you decided to betray me with him, you ended it." "It didn't mean anything," she said desperately. "It was a mistake, Jake. I don't even know why it happened, but it didn't mean anything." "You keep saying that," I said coldly. "Like it makes any of this better. Like it erases what you did." Emma reached for my arm, her voice trembling. "Please, Jake. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. Don't throw everything away because of one stupid decision." I pulled my arm away, my jaw clenched. "You don't love me, Emma. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to me, laughed about it with your friend, and then stood there pretending like everything was fine. She broke into sobs, her shoulders shaking as she collapsed against the wall. I was scared, she choked out. Scared of losing you. Scared of the future. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I love you. Ido. For a moment, I just stared at her, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom stood frozen, his face pale as he watched the exchange. You should leave, I said, turning to him. What? He said, his voice cracking. You heard me, I said firmly. Get out of here. Don't come back. Tom hesitated, then nodded slowly. I'm sorry, man, he said again, his voice hollow. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with Emma. The silence between us was deafening. Emma's sobs had quieted, but tears still streamed down her face. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said softly. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice steady. And now I have to figure out what comes next. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Jake, please, don't give up on us. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes, counseling, therapy, anything. Just don't walk away. I took a deep breath, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I don't know if this can be fixed, I said finally. You broke something that might never heal. And I need time to figure out if I can even try. Her face crumpled, and she sank to the floor, her hands covering her face. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time that day I felt like I was in control. Walking away from Emma was the easy part. Facing the crowd, I just stunned into silence. That was another story. The hallway led back toward the ceremony space, and I could hear the low murmur of voices. People were whispering, their shock and confusion buzzing like static in the air. I paused just outside the garden entrance, my stomach twisting. I had planned the vows as a way to expose the truth, to hold Emma and Tom accountable for their betrayal. But I hadn't considered what came next. Steeling myself, I stepped back into the garden. Heads turned immediately, and the murmurs quieted. I felt their eyes on me, hundreds of pairs, all filled with questions. My parents were the first to approach. My mom's face was etched with worry, while my dad's expression was a mix of concern and quiet fury. Jake, my mom said softly, gripping my arm. What's going on? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Emma and Tom, they betrayed me. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, what do you mean? I hesitated, lowering my voice. They slept together. Last night. My dad's face darkened, his jaw tightening. That bastard, he muttered. I didn't know how else to handle it. I admitted, my voice trembling. I couldn't stand up there and pretend everything was fine. Before my mom could respond, Emma's father stormed over, his face flushed with anger. Jake, he said, his voice sharp. What the hell was that? What's this nonsense about, Emma? It's not nonsense, I said firmly. Ask her yourself. Ask her what she was doing with Tom last night. His face froze, the anger draining into confusion. What are you saying? I'm saying your daughter cheated on me, I said, my voice rising. With my best friend, the night before our wedding. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby guests. Emma's father stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't quite process the words. You're lying, he said finally, his voice weak. I wish I was, I said. But I'm not. As Emma's father staggered back, her mother approached, tears streaming down her face. Jake, please, she whispered. This can't be true. I didn't have the energy to respond. Instead, I turned and walked toward the back of the garden, desperate for space. The crowd began to disperse as word of what had happened spread. People whispered in hushed tones, casting glances at me and at the now empty altar. I spotted Tom slinking toward the parking lot, his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Good. But Emma hadn't emerged from the building. I knew she was probably hiding, trying to figure out what to do next. Rebecca, my sister, found me sitting on a bench near the far end of the garden. What the hell just happened? She asked, her voice low but urgent. I looked up at her, my chest tight. They betrayed me, Rebecca. Emma and Tom. They slept together last night. Her face twisted with anger, and she let out a string of curses under her breath. I always knew Tom was a sleaze, she muttered. But Emma, I thought she loved you. So did I said bitterly. Rebecca sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder. What are you going to do now? I shook my head, staring out at the empty chairs. I don't know, I admitted, but I can't just pretend this didn't happen. The garden was nearly empty now, the once celebratory atmosphere replaced by an eerie quiet. Rows of white chairs stood abandoned, their bright decorations mocking me with their cheerfulness. The arch, still adorned with flowers, framed the altar where my life had just fallen apart. Rebecca sat beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. She wasn't one for sentimental words, but her presence was grounding. What about the reception? She asked after a while. I laughed bitterly. What reception? Pretty sure there's nothing left to celebrate. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. I'll take care of it. Someone has to let the staff know, and we'll need to send the guests home. Thanks, I muttered. Don't thank me, she said sharply, standing up. You're my brother, and no one screws with my family. Her words brought a faint smile to my face. As Rebecca headed off to deal with the logistics, I stayed behind, staring blankly at the garden. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew it was either Emma or Tom, and I wasn't ready to hear their excuses. A movement caught my eye. Emma's father was standing a few feet away, his face pale and drawn. Jake, he said hesitantly. I didn't respond, waiting for him to speak. I spoke to her, he said finally, his voice thick. Emma admitted it. She said it was a mistake, that she panicked, that it didn't mean anything. I clenched my fists, the rage bubbling back to the surface. She said that to me, too, I said bitterly. Funny how something that doesn't mean anything can destroy everything. He nodded, his hands trembling. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry, Jake. You didn't deserve this. No, I said coldly. I didn't. As he walked away, his shoulders slumped, I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He was just as blindsided as I was, watching the daughter he adored reveal a side of herself he never thought existed. But my sympathy didn't last long. I had enough of my own pain to deal with. I finally checked my phone when I got back to the groom's suite. There were several missed calls and texts from Emma. Jake, please, I need to talk to you. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Please don't throw it all away. Jake, I'm begging you. Just hear me out. Her desperation was evident, but it didn't move me. If anything, it made me angrier. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry for the fallout. I dropped my phone onto the table and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. What was I supposed to do now? Rebecca returned an hour later, her face flushed with frustration. The staff is handling the cancellation, she said, plopping into a chair. But a few nosy guests are still hanging around, trying to figure out what happened. They're like vultures. Let them wonder, I said. I don't owe anyone an explanation. She studied me for a moment. What about Emma? Are you going to talk to her? I shook my head. Not yet. I can't deal with her right now. Fair enough, Rebecca said. But at some point, you're going to have to figure out what comes next. I nodded, though I wasn't sure where to begin. By the time the last of the guests had left, the venue was a ghost town. The florists had started dismantling the decorations. The caterers were packing up uneaten trays of food, and the once vibrant celebration had turned into a cold, empty space. I stayed in the groom's suite, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The tuxedo I'd been so excited to wear now felt suffocating, a cruel costume for a play that had ended in disaster. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. Jake! It was Emma. I hesitated, every muscle in my body screaming at me to tell her to leave. But curiosity, maybe even a small, masochistic desire to hear her explanation, won out. Come in, I said, my voice flat. The door creaked open, and Emma stepped inside. Her makeup was smeared, her hair undone, and her dress wrinkled. She looked more like a ghost of a bride than the radiant woman who had walked down the aisle hours earlier. Thank you for letting me talk, she said softly, shutting the door behind her. Say what you need to say, I replied, not meeting her eyes. Emma wrung her hands, her voice trembling. I don't even know where to start. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back. And I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. I finally looked at her, my anger bubbling to the surface. Sorry for what? For betraying me? For lying to me? Or for getting caught? Her lip quivered, tears spilling down her cheeks. All of it, Jake. I messed up in ways I can't even explain. It wasn't about you or about us. It was me being selfish and scared, and don't you dare try to make this about fear. I snapped, my voice rising. If you were scared, you could have talked to me. Instead, you ran to Tom, my best friend. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Emma's tears came harder, but I didn't let up. You laughed about it, I said, my voice shaking. I heard you, Emma. You didn't sound scared. You sounded smug, like it didn't even matter. She sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. I didn't mean for you to hear that. I was trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. I was lying to myself, Jake. Well, congratulations, I said coldly. You're good at lying. You had me fooled for years. She looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara and desperation. I love you, Jake. I do. What happened with Tom? It was a mistake. A horrible, unforgivable mistake. But it wasn't because I don't love you. I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. You don't get to say you love me. Love isn't just words, Emma. It's actions. And your actions say something very different. She sobbed, reaching for my hand. Please, Jake. Don't let this be the end. I'll do anything to make it right. I pulled my hand away, standing abruptly. You can't make this right. You can't undo what you've done. And I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Her sobs filled the room as I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Jake, please, she cried. I stopped in the doorway, my chest tight with emotion. I need space, Emma. Don't contact me. Don't try to explain this away. I need time to figure out if there's anything left to save. And with that, I walked out, leaving her broken and alone in the groom's suite. The drive home from the venue was a blur. I didn't even know where I was going at first. I just drove, past the city limits, down empty roads, through neighborhoods that grew darker as the evening crept in. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house felt like a monument to the life I thought I was building. The welcome mat, the porch light Emma had insisted on installing, the flower pot she'd arranged, it all mocked me. I left the car idling and sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the house. Going inside felt impossible, like stepping into a museum of broken promises. The next morning, I woke up on the couch in a friend's apartment. Rebecca had called them after the wedding fiasco, knowing I'd need a place to crash. They didn't ask questions, just handed me a blanket and told me to take my time. I appreciated their kindness, but the truth was no amount of space or time could make the pain go away. The text from Emma kept coming. Jake, please, just let me talk to you. I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to hear me out. I'm so sorry. Please don't shut me out completely. I didn't respond to any of them. Every notification felt like another punch to the gut, a reminder of the life I thought I had and the betrayal that had ripped it apart. My parents stopped by that afternoon. Rebecca told us what happened. My mom said, her voice soft as she sat beside me. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. My dad stood silently by the window, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He wasn't the emotional type, but I could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. I just don't get it, I said finally, my voice hollow. How could she do this to me? How could he? My mom wrapped an arm around me, her grip firm. Because some people are selfish, Jake. It's not about you. It's about them and their own flaws. I thought I knew her, I said, shaking my head. I thought I knew both of them. You can't blame yourself for trusting them, she said. Trust is a good thing. They're the ones who broke it, not you. Later that evening, I went back to the house. It still felt like a stranger's home, but it was the only place I had. Max, our golden retriever, greeted me at the door, wagging his tail as though nothing had changed. Hey, buddy, I murmured, kneeling to scratch his ears. You're the only one who hasn't let me down. His tail thumped against the floor, his big brown eyes full of unconditional love. I sank onto the couch, Max curling up beside me, and stared at the blank TV screen. 2 days later, Rebecca called. She's been trying to get in touch with me, she said, her voice hesitant. She wants me to talk to you. Don't, I said firmly. She says she just wants to explain. She's had plenty of chances to explain, I snapped. I don't need to hear her excuses again. Rebecca sighed. I get it, Jake, but you're going to have to face her eventually, even if it's just to tell her you're done. That night, I sat on the porch, staring at the stars. My phone buzzed with yet another message from Emma. Jake, please. Just give me one chance to explain. If you still want to walk away after that, I'll accept it. But please don't let it end like this. I clenched my jaw, the rage simmering again. But beneath it, there was a flicker of something else, curiosity. What more could she possibly say? The next morning, I woke up to the same nagging thought. What else could Emma possibly have to say? She had already destroyed the trust between us. What explanation could make any of this less unbearable? But Rebecca's words echoed in my head. You're going to have to face her eventually, even if it's just to tell her you're done. I picked up my phone and texted Emma for the first time since the wedding. I'll meet you at the house. 5 p.m. Don't be late. Her response came almost immediately. Thank you. I'll be there. By the time 5 p.m. rolled around, I was pacing the living room like a caged animal. Max followed me back and forth, occasionally nudging my hand with his nose. When I heard Emma's car pull into the driveway, my heart pounded in my chest. The doorbell rang, and I hesitated before opening it. Emma stood on the porch, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She clutched a folder in her hands, like she'd come prepared for a court hearing. Thanks for letting me come, she said softly. Don't thank me, I replied, stepping aside to let her in. We sat in the living room, an awkward silence stretching between us. Emma fidgeted with the folder, her hands trembling. I don't even know where to start, she said finally. Try the truth, I said coldly. She flinched, her eyes filling with tears. I've been thinking about everything I did, the lies, the betrayal. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to understand what happened. Why? I snapped. Why should I care about your reasons? You made your choice, Emma. You didn't care about me then. That's not true, she said quickly. I did care. I still care. I was just scared. Scared of what? I demanded. Of everything, she cried. The wedding, the future, the pressure of being perfect for you. I felt like I was suffocating, and instead of talking to you, I made the worst mistake of my life. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. So you slept with Tom to deal with wedding stress? That's your excuse. Her face crumpled, and she shook her head. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about you. It was about me being weak and selfish and stupid. I'm not trying to make excuses, Jake. I just need you to know that it didn't mean anything. Stop saying that, I said, my voice sharp. You keep saying it didn't mean anything like that makes it better. It meant something to me. It destroyed everything we had. Emma's tears fell harder, but she didn't look away. I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But Jake, I love you. I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes, therapy, counseling, whatever you need. Just don't let this be the end. I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger, pain, and something I couldn't quite name. What about Tom? I asked, my voice cold. Does he know you're here, begging for forgiveness? Emma shook her head. I haven't spoken to him since the wedding. He tried to contact me, but I blocked him. He doesn't matter, Jake. He never did. Her words were desperate, pleading, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or just another performance. I stood, pacing the room as I tried to process everything. Do you even understand what you've done? I asked, my voice trembling. You didn't just cheat on me, Emma. You humiliated me. You made me question everything I thought I knew about you, about Tom, about our relationship. I know, she said, her voice breaking. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me. Please, Jake, don't give up on us. Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. For a moment, I almost believed her. But then I remembered the look on her face when I overheard her whispering to Ashley. The smugness, the confidence that she'd never get caught. I need time to think, I said finally, my voice hollow. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. Take all the time you need. I'll wait as long as it takes. After she left, I sat on the couch with Max, staring at the folder she'd left behind. Inside were pages of notes, apologies, plans for therapy, promises to do better. I closed it and set it aside. It wasn't about her plans or her promises. It was about whether I could ever move past what she'd done. After Emma left, the house felt unnervingly quiet. I stared at the folder she'd left on the table, its neat pages full of her desperate attempts to fix what she had broken. Promises, apologies, and plans for therapy filled the pages, each word begging me to consider a future where we might somehow piece things back together. Max rested his head on my lap, his big brown eyes watching me as if he could sense my turmoil. "What do you think, buddy?" I murmured, scratching behind his ears. "Do we give her another chance? Or is this it?" Max thumped his tail once, a comforting but unhelpful response. I flipped through the folder again, reading the handwritten letter Emma had included at the very front. "Jake, I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back. I know I've broken your trust, and I don't deserve forgiveness. But I also know that what we had was real, and I can't let it go without a fight. Please let me prove that I can be better, that I can be the person you thought I was. I love you, and I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you if you'll let me." Her words felt raw, desperate, but I couldn't shake the memory of her voice in the bridal suite, laughing with Ashley about the secret she thought she'd buried. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was the smugness, the lies, the way she had carried on with no regard for what it would do to me. The following day, Rebecca stopped by unannounced. She didn't knock, just let herself in like she always did, carrying a bag of takeout and 2 beers. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, setting the bag on the counter. "Thanks," I muttered. She handed me a beer and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "So, what's the plan?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. She wants me to give her another chance. She's begging me to let her prove she can change." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "And do you believe her?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe she's serious. But the other part of me, I can't stop hearing her voice. I can't stop seeing her with Tom." Rebecca nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you need to ask yourself, can you ever look at her the same way again? Can you ever trust her? Even a little?" Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as memories of Emma played in my mind. The good times, the trips we'd taken, the nights we'd spent talking until dawn, felt like they belonged to someone else. And the bad times, the lies, the betrayal, loomed like a shadow over everything else. Could I really forgive her? Or was I just delaying the inevitable? By the time the sun rose the next morning, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. The house was silent except for the faint creaks of the floorboards and Max's soft snoring from the foot of the bed. Emma's letter and plan sat on the table in the kitchen, untouched since the night before. I had tried to push her words out of my mind, but they lingered like a ghost, tugging at the edges of my thoughts. Rebecca's question from the day before kept coming back to me. "Can you ever look at her the same way again?" And the truth was I didn't know if I could. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. It was another text from Emma. "Jake, I don't want to bother you, but I just need to know if there's any hope. Please, just let me know where we stand." I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone down without responding. Instead, I leashed up Max and took him for a walk. We walked farther than usual, past the quiet suburban streets and into the wooded trails at the edge of town. The crisp air cleared my head as Max trotted happily ahead of me, blissfully unaware of the chaos my life had become. Somewhere along the trail, I stopped and sat on a bench, Max lying at my feet. The trees rustled gently in the wind, and for the first time in days, I felt a strange kind of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from knowing everything is going to be okay. It was the peace of acceptance, the realization that no matter what happened next, I had to move forward one way or another. I thought about the life Emma and I had built together, the plans we'd made, and the future we'd dreamed of. But I also thought about the cracks that had been forming long before the wedding day. The late nights when she seemed distant, the little lies I'd brushed off, the moments when I'd felt like I was giving more than I was getting. Her betrayal with Tom hadn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of a pattern I'd ignored for far too long. As much as I wanted to blame her, and I did, part of me had to admit that the foundation of our relationship had been shaky for a while. When I got back to the house, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened Emma's folder. I read through every word, every promise, every plan she'd outlined to win back my trust. It was clear she was trying, but was it enough? By evening, I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone and texted Emma. "We need to talk. Come over tomorrow at 6. Her response came quickly. "Thank you. I'll be there." That night, I sat with Max on the couch, my thoughts calm for the first time in weeks. The decision wasn't easy, but it felt right. No matter how much Emma begged or how sincere her promises were, I couldn't ignore what she'd done. Some wounds ran too deep to heal. The next evening, I sat in the living room, waiting for Emma to arrive. Max lay on the floor beside me, his tail occasionally wagging as if sensing the tension in the air. I tried to focus on the sound of the clock ticking, but my mind kept drifting to the conversation that was about to unfold. At exactly 6 p.m., there was a knock on the door. I stood, my heart pounding, and opened it to find Emma on the porch. She looked nervous, her hands clutching the strap of her purse tightly. "Hi," she said softly. "Come in," he replied. "Stepping gazide." We sat across from each other in the living room, the silence between us heavy. Emma's eyes darted to the folder on the table, as if searching for reassurance. "Thank you for letting me come," she said after a moment. "I know this isn't easy." I nodded, my jaw tight. I've been a lot of thinking since the wedding. She flinched at the mention of it, her eyes brimming with tears. "Jake, I meant what I said. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll go to therapy, I'll give you full access to everything, my phone, my emails, whatever it takes. I just need you to give me a chance." Her desperation was palpable, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Emma, let me talk," I said firmly. She nodded, her lips trembling as she fell silent. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "What you did with Tom, it broke something in me. It broke my trust, my confidence, and everything I thought I knew about us. I've spent the last few weeks trying to figure out if that's something I can get back, and I keep coming to the same conclusion." Her face crumpled, a sob escaping her lips. "Jake, please. I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. "I can't spend the rest of my life wondering if the person I'm with is lying to me. I can't keep second-guessing everything you say and do. That's not a life, it's a prison." Emma buried her face in her hands, her sobs filling the room. "I love you," she choked out. "I love you so much, Jake. I don't know why I did what I did, but I swear to you, it didn't mean anything. It didn't change the way I feel about you." Her words felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but I stayed firm. "If it didn't mean anything, then why did you do it?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why wasn't I enough for you?" "It wasn't about you," she cried. "It was my own insecurity, my own fear of failure. I was scared, Jake. Scared of messing up our life together. Scared of letting you down." Her excuses felt hollow, like she was grasping at straws to explain something even she didn't fully understand. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I trusted you with my heart, my future, everything. And you threw it away for what? A meaningless fling with someone who was supposed to be my best friend?" She shook her head frantically. "I didn't throw it away, Jake. I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake, but that doesn't erase everything we've built together. It doesn't erase the love we have." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Maybe it doesn't erase it, but it changes it, and I don't think I can live with that change." Emma reached across the table, her hand trembling as she touched mine. "Please, Jake," she whispered, "don't give up on us. Let me prove to you that we can still have the life we dreamed of. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Just don't walk away." I looked down at her hand, the weight of her words pressing on my chest like a boulder. For a brief moment, I considered it. I thought about the good times we'd shared, the love we'd once had, and the future we'd planned together. But then I remembered the betrayal, the lies, the whispers, the smug laugh that told me she thought she'd gotten away with it. And I knew what I had to do. I gently pulled my hand away, standing up. "I'm sorry, Emma, but I can't do this anymore." Her sobs grew louder, her body shaking as she buried her face in her hands. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," I said, my voice trembling. "But I can't be a part of it anymore." Emma's sobs echoed through the room as I walked toward the door. I wanted to feel relief, like a weight had been lifted off my chest, but instead, there was only an aching emptiness. "Jake," she called after me, her voice raw and broken. "Please don't go." I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. "You made your choice, Emma," I said quietly. "And now I'm making mine." With that, I opened the door and stepped out into the cool evening air. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the sound of her cries. I sat on the porch for a long time, staring out at the darkened street. The air was crisp, the faint hum of crickets filling the silence. Max padded out after me, curling up at my feet with a heavy sigh. "You're lucky, buddy," I murmured, scratching behind his ears. "You don't have to deal with any of this." His tail wagged lazily, his presence comforting in a way words could never be. I thought about everything Emma had said, her apologies, her promises, her desperate pleas. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the hope that we could somehow rebuild what had been destroyed. But another part of me, the part that had been carrying the weight of her betrayal since the wedding day, knew better. Trust wasn't something you could glue back together. Once it was shattered, the cracks would always remain. The next morning, Rebecca came by, as she always did when things got rough. "So?" she asked, sitting on the porch steps beside me. "I ended it," I said simply. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "How do you feel?" I shrugged, staring at the coffee mug in my hands. "No, mostly, but I think I made the right decision." Rebecca was quiet for a moment before resting a hand on my shoulder. "You did, Jake. You deserve better than someone who would do what she did." Her words were meant to comfort me, but they felt hollow. As the days passed, the numbness began to give way to something else, a strange sense of clarity. I'd spent so much time trying to make sense of Emma's betrayal, trying to figure out what I could have done differently, what I might have missed. But now, I realized that it wasn't about me at all. Emma's choices were her own. Her fears, her insecurities, her selfishness. Those were things she would have to reckon with. My job wasn't to fix her. My job was to take care of myself, to heal, and to move forward. That evening, I started packing up her things. Her clothes, her books, the little trinkets she'd scattered throughout the house. I put everything in boxes and stacked them by the door. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of closure. By the time the last box was sealed, the house felt emptier, but also lighter. Max followed me around as I cleaned, his tail wagging every time I stopped to pet him. When I finally sat down on the couch, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Letting go wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The day Emma came to pick up her things, I made sure I wasn't home. I didn't want another tearful confrontation or desperate plea. Rebecca agreed to be there in my place, acting as a buffer to ensure everything went smoothly. When I returned that evening, the boxes were gone. The space where her presence had once been, her books on the shelves, her jacket by the door, her favorite mug on the counter, was now empty. It wasn't the crushing sadness I had expected. It felt like a blank canvas, ready for something new. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my routine. I poured my energy into work, hit the gym more often, and spent hours with Max exploring new trails and parks. His enthusiasm for the simplest things, chasing a ball, sniffing a patch of grass, reminded me that life didn't have to be as complicated as I'd made it. Bit by bit, the ache in my chest began to fade. Emma texted me once a week after picking up her things. "I hope you're doing okay. I just wanted to say I'm sorry again. For everything. I'll never stop regretting what I did, and I'll always wish things had turned out differently." I read the message several times before deleting it. There was no need to respond. The chapter was closed, and I didn't see the point in reopening it. Rebecca and I had dinner one evening, and she raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said with a grin. I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. "To not settling for less than we deserve," I added. She smirked. "Damn right." A month later, I was walking Max at the park when a woman stopped to pet him. "He's beautiful," she said, her smile warm. "Thanks," I replied, watching as Max wagged his tail excitedly. We chatted for a few minutes, exchanging laughs and stories about our dogs. When she finally walked away, I realized something surprising. I felt lighter. For the first time since the wedding day, I wasn't carrying the weight of Emma's betrayal. I wasn't stuck in the past, replaying every painful moment. I was here, in the present, with a future waiting to be written. To anyone reading this, healing isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But it's possible. And sometimes the hardest decisions, the ones that break you in the moment, are the ones that set you free. What would you have done in my shoes? Could you forgive? Or is trust too fragile once it's broken? Let me know in the comments.